You want to know about the type? You've seen this before. This is the 61 Cavalry type, the only horse regiment, perhaps in the world, but in India. These are horses going in all directions, cavalry charging.
Okay.
With a lance. All right, so Navidita, we were saying about General Sagat Singh. And he came and visited the divisional headquarters, the Major General, to ask for his plan. So he said to Div Commander, he said, I'll require 2 days or so to contact the river on our side and examine up and down whether it was held or not, and take a few reconnaissance patrols across the river to see if it is held by the enemy on the other side. It's another 2 days. So it'll take me 4 days to try and cross this river, provided I am able to overcome the enemy defenses on the other side. So General Sagat Singh heard his orders, got into the helicopter, and he had to go back to Shillong, where his headquarters was there. Told the pilot that, look, let's go a little forward towards that river. So when he was about 2,000 meters from the river, the pilot tells him that, look, General, I am not permitted to fly so close to the enemy lines because we've already crossed the enemy border and there's the river in front, and I don't have permission to fly there. So General Sagat Singh told him that, look, it doesn't matter, I'm sitting with you, and nobody in your Air Force headquarters knows where we are. You don't have to inform them. Just fly there. I want to see up to the river line. So he flew up and down the river line, looking outside, and found nobody there. He said, now, son, you crossed the river. So this Air Force chap said, I'm not allowed to cross the river, sir, because this is enemy territory. We are well inside his border, and we could be shot down. And you're a senior officer. So then General Sagat Singh said that both of us are together, and if we get shot down, nobody will be able to tell the sorry tale. So cross the river. So they stepped across the river, and they went up and down. And there was a village further up, another kilometer beyond, Bangladesh village. He said, fly over there. So they flew to the village and found a big field where the villagers used to have their cattle and all that grazing. So they flew around a bit and found no Pakistani defenses. So he said, you land here. So again, after much fear, the helicopter pilot said, I landed there, kept the rotors on. And General Sagat Singh got out and all the villagers came running. Now the villagers didn't know whether he was an Indian general or a Pakistani general because they hadn't seen a military man for a long time. They said to him, General Saab, the Indians have come to the other side of the river, and our troops have not arrived. So he said, all right. He told his ADC, he was also in the aircraft. He said, you get down with the radio set here. The ADC got down. He said, I'm putting my ADC here. Give him some tea and something to eat. I'll bring the troops to defend your village. He flew back to Div headquarters, landed there, called the general officer commanding, the GOC, the major general, called his 2 brigade commanders and the artillery brigade commander, put them all inside the helicopter with their radio sets and said, come on, I want to show you something. He took them across to the Pakistani village of the Meghna, deposited them, his ADC was standing there, put them on the ground, got his ADC back into the aircraft and said, now get your division across. So whereas that division was planning to cross that massive river over a period of 3 to 5 days, it was done in just 1 day. This is the sort of action which completely put out the Pakistani defense. Also, to give you some more stories from the eastern side of East Pakistan, from the Tripura side, there was a brigade, 61 Mountain Brigade, commanded by Tom Pandey, Brigadier Tom Pandey, who's a gunner officer. And he was asked to progress his battle. He had his troops to capture certain areas And the Pakistani troops were so, shall we say, put out by the speed of advance that when they were attacked by a battalion of infantry, though they were a battalion of infantry, they thought a whole brigade or something more is attacking them.
Okay.
And they did put up a bit of a fight, but they preferred to withdraw from there.
Oh.
Also, there were some Bangladeshis, I mean, there were some Bengali officers,
Okay.
Air Force officers who originated in the Pakistan Air Force,
Mm.
who had come away to East Pakistan. And I think there was the level of squadron leader and flying officer, and there were 2, 3 of them. They came and they asked our Air Force to help them to contribute
Mm.
to this battle. So, with the permission of the Eastern Air Command, they managed to get hold of 2, 3 helicopters and a couple of Dornier aircraft. Dornier is a very small aircraft.
Mm.
Uh, to give to the people. They were given flying training by our Air Force officers near Agartala. And then they were given a task during the war that after they had practiced very well to fly at night at a low height for long distance and come back, they then did a strike when the war had started to go right from Agartala to Chittagong and to fire missiles and bombs at the Chittagong port to destroy the stock of petroleum fuel. The petroleum fuel was again in large tanks. And so, with rockets and with bombs, they destroyed a large number of tanks and perhaps destroyed the availability of petroleum and oil and lubricants to the East Pakistan army, which created a factor in the not being able to defend the place properly. And this is the sort of action that you should take place.
Mm.
Then there was a paradrop by a parachute battalion led by, I think it's 4 para, led by a person whom I knew when he was a kid, but now he was a lieutenant colonel,
Yeah.
and he was commanding this battalion. They took off an aircraft from the Calcutta side, and they landed just north of Dhaka
Okay.
by parachute. Collected themselves, got themselves organized, and then joined up with General Sagat Singh's troops, which were advancing along the same Doha. Because once you cross the Meghna, you go deep south, you go straight to Dhaka. Dhaka, as you know, is surrounded by a large number of rivers on all sides. But this area, which is north of Dhaka, you cross the Meghna and you are on line to go to the outskirts of Dhaka. So, like this, the Indian armies seem to have surrounded Dhaka. And much of this was a story about some of our tanks. Many of our tanks that were advancing or infantry troops that were advancing were met by Bangladeshis, I mean, East Pakistan villagers or Mukti Bahini to say, don't go there, there are a lot of mines there. Sit on your column of road transport or tanks and guide them at night in such a way that they could cross the minefields and go on the rear of the Pakistani defenses. In other words, what the Indian army achieved in East Pakistan is unheard of in the annals of military history, because I think very few armies, if at all any, could have conquered a land like East Pakistan right from our border to Dhaka in a matter of 14 days, crossing the most riverine terrain in the world. The causes of this, I would say, are a number of causes. One is, as I said, the support of the local people themselves of that country. And the fact that we had local people antagonistic to their own army. Therefore, they were more supportive of the so-called Indian army, which is supposed to be an enemy army, rather than their old army for the defense. which indicates the relationship that any military force must have with its own people. All right. The second point was that the morale of soldiers is very important. There is an incident here. I described this. One of our brigade commanders was going to attack a Pakistani battalion position, which is on the western side, near Hilli, on the border of Indian East Pakistan. And he had his three battalions surrounding this position. It is a Pakistani Baluch battalion, which was in defensive position, very well armed and very well located to defend from all directions. After he had got his troops in position, this Indian brigadier just felt in his mind that, I can massacre all these people. Why? Because he had his guns ready, he had the whole corps artillery ready in his support, and he was ready to do this attack against one battalion. There were 3 or 4 battalions of his own, and he just decided to try something. So he got into a jeep alone with the jeep driver, put his flag and his star plate on it, drove across no man's land into the enemy position. And he went there, and there was a JSO on guard there with a platoon of infantry. And they said, Brigadier, you're a very brave man that you've come across the no man's land into our grasp, but we now capture you. So he said, no, that's all right. I want to talk to your commanding officer. The JSO said, I'm sorry, there are no officers available here. He said, then who's the boss of this place? He said, well, we've got a Subedar Major here. Please call him. The Subedar Major Saab came. Subedar Major is the highest rank from the Jawans that you reach. So Subedar Major was asked by the brigadier, look, if you look over there, I've got a whole battalion ready to go in the battle. And you're surrounded from 3 sides. And I've got all the corps artillery. And if I don't go back to my lines in the next 15 minutes, the attack is going to go through. But I don't want to destroy all of you, fine soldiers. And you have no officer here. So I want to know firstly, where are your officers? So the Subedar Major said there is a canal rest house about 30 kilometers further back. All the officers are there enjoying the Bengali women whom they've kept.
Okay.
So then the brigadier said, well, in that case, I suggest you take the decision yourself. You lay down your weapons. And I assure you that only the Geneva Convention would be used. When you take prisoners, you just ask for name, rank, and number.
Okay.
You do not ask anything else. He said, please be assured that there'll be no torture, nothing. We will take you as prisoners, treat you as colleagues. We'll only ask you your name, rank, and number, but we'll lay down your weapons. We don't want to kill you, chaps. And in due course, when the two countries decide to have peace, we'll send you back to Pakistan. So the Subedar Major gave orders and they all laid down their weapons. That's a whole battalion of infantry, about 600 men. This is a sort of example. Now, if you examine this point, why does it happen? No human being is ready to accept incorrect action by their superiors. I mean, if the superiors are ordering rape and killing of innocent people in East Pakistan, the common soldier, even if he belongs to West Pakistan, is certainly not happy with this. He may obey his orders because those are orders, but at the same time, morally, he's upset. And then if his officers are all enjoying women at the back there, somewhere, and he's left in the front to try and defend his land, his morale is very low. And he's quite happy to lay down his weapons. Otherwise, how can you capture 93,000 prisoners? Another point was that when General Niazi was sitting there in Dhaka, he had more troops in Dhaka, about 5 times more troops than the Indians who were surrounding it. But our move had been so fast, and we had avoided so many towns on the way, we just went straight to Dhaka. And the orders from the Army Chief Sam Manekshaw and the DGMO was that you will not capture any town, but cut off Dhaka from its port of Chittagong. Point is, in the Indian Army, we don't like to get into towns because, like you see in Ukraine, you get into a town, it's a battle for every building.
Right.
It can last for months.
Mm.
And that was a lesson of World War II also. So we don't like to get into towns, we like to avoid towns. And so we did that. But having reached the capital, which is deep inside East Pakistan, uh, and General Niazi and his troops were very afraid of the local people. So they really wanted to be protected from the locals. And we had the Chief of Staff of Eastern Army, a chap called General Jacob, who was my instructor in Staff College, if you recollect. He was a lieutenant colonel at that time when I was a major doing the Staff College course. And he and I used to have a lot of arguments, but we were good friends. Now he had become a major general, he was Chief of Staff. He's a very glib talker, he's a Jew. And in fact, he was one of when India got relations with Israel, he was our first ambassador to Israel, General Jacob. And so General Jacob went there and he used his technique to frighten the wits out of General Niazi that if you don't sign unconditional surrender and lay down your weapons now, I leave you to the local Bengalis, they will play hell with you. They'll take revenge against every Pakistan. So the result was that General Niazi decided to lay down. Now, this procedure was done. In fact, Army headquarters, I think, were a little surprised with the speed with which this action took place. The Army commander for Eastern Army was a man called Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora. He was the commander and he naturally encouraged all his commanders to use the initiative and move as fast as possible. And though the orders were not to capture Dhaka, but Dhaka literally fell into our hands because of the surrounding of Dhaka and the fear and despondency amongst the Pakistani leadership and the troops, fear of the local people. And also, morally, I think they were very depressed because no one likes to do nasty things to others. I have a feeling that that does affect the human psyche in some way or another. So that's the fall of Dhaka took place in a matter of the Soviet Union at that time had told us that, please finish your business in East Pakistan within 14, 15 days so that we don't have to go to the General Assembly in the United Nations. So we did it in 14 days flat. And I don't think any army in the world could have done this, except the Indian Army because of its relations with the Bengali people and with the Mukti Bahini, who were Bengalis, led by some of us and trained by some of us, but nonetheless, they were willing to fight for their country, provided they got the weapons and the ammunition and the bit of leadership, which was provided. And by the way, these people, for instance, that officer who did the attack on Chittagong, he was only a wing commander. He became the East Pakistan, or rather the Bangladesh air chief in due course of time. See? And some of the officers became army chief. The relationship between them and us was very interesting because it's not that Indian Army did everything. It is the East Pakistanis themselves which have contributed tremendously to this victory, and Indian Army is helped. As a result, the relationship with them then and us now is very close, and I hope it continues that way. A lot of interesting changes have taken place over the last 75 years over the borders and this, that, and the other to create less areas of conflict between us and Bangladesh. Not only did this create a new nation called Bangladesh, but we assisted it to go to the United Nations and become a member of the international body as a separate nation. So in 1971 war, not only was Pakistan broken into two parts, but we created a new nation called Bangladesh and got it accepted in the United Nations as a sovereign country. And this is a unique aspect that has been done post World War II. And if I might say, as far as India is concerned, I think other than Ashoka the Great in our distant history, which is the golden age of India, this is the most successful battle ever fought by the Indian Army after independence. Even today, if you go to Calcutta and you're a military man, there's so much respect by the local people and local police and everybody for you because they know what you did in 1971. And that is from our side, that's from the Calcutta side. But there's a very close association now. Many Calcutta people have told me that the true Bengali language, for instance, is at Dhaka. So we wait and see what happens here, because I do feel the Bengalis are very, very close in their culture, their language, and everything, despite the fact that they are divided into two countries, in Bangladesh and West Bengal. On the western side, peace was declared after this result of victory in East Pakistan, and two corps of the Indian Army, with the newly raised under General Rana, was moved post haste to the western side. He arrived in the southern part of Punjab with his headquarters and his corps, two divisions, and his corps headquarters, and they came up to Kotkapura, which was the advanced headquarters of 11 Corps. Naveen Rawley was handed over to 2 Corps. So General Rana became the boss here, and our 1st Armored Division was in his area, though we were the reserve of the Army Chief. So yeah, I had an interesting occasion to meet the general, because he wanted my boss, that's General Gurbachan Singh, to come and explain why the armored division should not do certain defensive actions as required by him as a war commander. General Butch refused to go to see him because he said, I am an army headquarters reserve. So if you want to talk to me, to ask the chief of army staff whether he permits me to come and talk to you. Otherwise, I take orders only from the chief of army staff. So General Butch had gone on some visit to 7th Division other side for a day or two, and I was alone at the headquarters. So I got instructions that would you please come to Kotkapura to the corps headquarters and meet the general officer commander. So I said, fine. So I landed up there. So I was received by Lieutenant Colonel Rodrigues, who, by the way, became the army chief after me, and who served under me when I was commanding a corps. So gunners, and again, a very good officer. He was the G1 operations of 2 Corps headquarters. And so he received me and he brought me to the operations room, and General Rana was there. So the 3 of us were alone with large maps. And so General Rana asked me, he said, now that your boss is not here, I want to hear from you as to why don't you follow my orders? Now, what his orders were that because he's defending a large sector, right from Firozpur to Suratkar in northern Rajasthan, he wanted the armored division, instead of being located between Buxar and Malot and these places, to have a brigade in the south, a brigade in the center, a brigade in the north. We have got 2 armored brigades with armored infantry, four battle groups, in fact. So he wanted them distributed across the border so that in case the enemy attacks, he can defend. So he said that this will help us in defending Punjab. So I told him, I said, but General, our job is attack and not defense. So he said, but when you're called for attack, you can concentrate and go for attack. I said, that won't work. We have to be concentrated the way we want, depending on the areas where we want to attack. So you asked me. Now, this is something I'd like to explain to you about the way armor has to be used, because infantry generals may not quite understand this. He said, if Pakistan army crosses through the Rajasthan desert and we can't stop them, then we need tanks there to stop them. So if you don't agree to separating the various combat groups of the armored division to cover this area of the border, it's a very large area, how do we stop these tanks? I said, no, we don't stop these tanks. We attack into Pakistan territory and we cut off their tail. He said, how does that help? I said, because each tank must have fuel and must have ammunition before it can fight. They run the certain distance, it requires more fuel. But if I cut off his tail by going into his country and attacking his headquarters, then he has to come back. In other words, in the use of tank formations or the old days, the cavalry, you don't want to fight the enemy head on. You go from areas which are vacant, well behind his lines, and attack his headquarters and his supply lines and his logistics lines so that he cannot advance anymore. So I managed to explain that to him and keep my end of the thing up as per my general's orders. But it did give me the impression that in our defense of our country, we have certain army commanders defending the border. Their job depends on defending the border properly. Therefore, if reserve forces, reserve attack forces, come into their sector, then they want the reserve forces to be deployed in such a way that their defense improves. Now, I don't blame them for that because that is their task. Later on in life, when we became more senior and I could talk directly to the army chief, I said, you need an army commander who's totally offensive in his mind and not defensive in his mind. That means you can have defensive army commanders. But for attack forces, you have to have an offensive army commander who has a certain sector under his control, and he has offensive forces. His whole aim is to get into enemy territory. I do believe that the best form of defense is attack. Now, we've got a confrontation with China. There's a lot of diplomatic problems here also involved, but we have to have sufficient forces to be able to attack. That means entering their territory. It's a vast border. They can enter anywhere, so can we. But unless you attack, the man has to defend himself rather than you defending yourself all the time and he's attacking. I don't know, Nivedita, if you are interested in boxing. Many of our women are top-class boxers. The Nekat lady just now won a gold medal in the Commonwealth Games. So the women are fighters now. You will appreciate that in a boxing ring, if you're standing in a corner with the other person beating you up, you're defending yourself with your arms, whatever way you can. You're not going to win that fight. But you have to lead a punch. Unless you lead that punch as an offensive, you make the other person defend himself. See? So even if you're weaker, you have to hit back. And the other person must realize that you're not going to take it lying down, you're going to hit back, and hit back very nastily. You may get defeated eventually, but you must hit back. That is the principle on which, whether you're a little kid in school, whether you're a military man with large forces under your control, you must have that attitude of offensive spirit, no matter how weak you are. So that is the lessons that we learned from the 71 war. And now there's one more thing I want to talk about, the peace. The peace took another year. We eventually had the Simla conference in 1972 when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had taken over the president because Yahya Khan had been moved out. And he and his daughter Benazir, who was only 6 years old, came to Simla, and Indira Gandhi met them and they wanted to create a peace. Now, in the peace, what we hoped was the Kashmir question would be sorted out once and for all. Because you had a battle, you defeated the Pakistan army so badly, you got 93,000 prisoners in your possession, and you're only going to give them back after a satisfactory peace is declared. So we had the upper hand. But what I want to convey here is that what the military does for a nation is to create the advantages on the ground, which the politics has to take advantage of in their politics, in the diplomacy, to wrest the advantage from the enemy. Unfortunately, in India, right from Jawaharlal Nehru's days, the politicians have always failed the military. The military achieves something, but you give it away and don't take advantage of it. In the 1947 war, when we were on the offensive and we were going to capture the rest of Kashmir on the other side of the Pir Panjal ranges, Jawaharlal Nehru went to the out to being advised by Mountbatten, went off to the United Nations and handed it over to them. So they declared the peace and we had to come back instead of getting our territory back. In the 1965 war, Shastri went off to Tashkent and said, all right, everybody comes back to their own place. We gave some very important areas of Kashmir back to Pakistan, and we took back certain areas in the Cham area, and then whatever we had gained, we had to come back. That means all that blood, sweat, and tears that the army did was of no purpose. Then in the 71 war, we got whole of East Pakistan, and we created a new nation, and we had 93,000 prisoners. We gave it all away because instead of a proper border being worked out or the Kashmir question being settled, we made it a line of control, which is an area of dispute even today. So what I want to say here is that you need a much more staunch political and diplomatic thinking on these subjects. You can't be such a peacenik that you give it all away in the hope of creating a better relationship in the future. Because certain nations like Pakistan cannot be trusted. No matter what they sign, they break the signature and again start attacking you with terrorism and this, that, and the other. So why should anyone try and appease them all the time? So our view is that, you don't appease a nasty guy. Now, the nasty chap has to be taught a lesson, but if you appease him and give him back everything and not enforce your will, for instance, Kashmir belongs to India, and you can't say that half of Kashmir can be left at Pakistan all the time. Mr. Modi has taken some actions here by removing Article 370, etc., etc. But you can't be a sort of a person always so keen to make friends that you give away the strategic advantages that you have gained by your military action. So what's the point of a military action if you're going to give it all back again? So this is a point one should understand, and the public of India should understand. We don't want anybody else's country, but at least we want our land back, which is clearly our land as per the partition of India and as per the accession of Kashmir Maharaja to the Indian Union that belongs to us. So a portion of it has been taken by the Pakistanis right since 47. It's necessary to go back, and there are parliamentary and cabinet decisions on that subject which are recorded right from 1947 on, that we have to get our territory back. But when we did have the capability of doing so, we gave it. We did not carry out that action.